Hello, science lovers. Welcome again to another year of Science Sunday. We're meeting remotely as the Delta variant of the COVID-19 coronavirus has been peaking throughout the country, taxing resources, staff, supplies, and also our patients. Scott Thompson and I are here along with the AV staff up in the balcony. Justin, and we hope you're tuning in at home as we discuss and present all things science-natured for what is our second decade at DUUC. Scott ably handed science duties over the summer as I took a good long break, and thank you for that. You hosted quite a few topics and talks and Zoom.
Informal discussions. One of them I did kind of a show and tell of some of my astronomy equipment. It was fun.
Nice, nice. Thanks. I just felt like we had done it through the course of the whole pre-COVID year, decided as COVID took on to do it through last summer to try to have the church have some content to present to people, and thought that was a service that both of us could provide. So that was the year, the summer of 2020, went through with more things, and since I think Scott is more knowledgeable and comfortable, and he puts a lot of preparation into his work and so on too, but I feel like I'm cross-checking references and looking at things pretty deeply to try to not make a fool of myself up here. And
Oh, I do the same thing.
make a fool of me up here?
Yeah, it's one of my primary goals.
I just felt like I needed a break and kept away from it a bit, and I think it was good for me. But so we're gathered here to resume Science Sunday again on the first and third Sundays of the month, and we're happy that you're here, hope that you're participating, and feel free and welcome to join in, to send comments in. I'm trying to have a few open-ended questions in this talk too, so if you're listening to this live, please respond in the chat, and Scott's monitoring that, and I'm going to look for maybe a few answers to some thought-provoking questions I bring up, and give you an opportunity to say what you're thinking about the topic of today. We've received such nice support from you, and we've received support from DUUC, providing the AV team and the structure for us to work in. We appreciate that, just the mental support behind it all too. Also, the Prairie State Humanists Association, of which Scott's president. And, of course, from all our loyal fellow science lovers throughout the community. Your support and friendship mean a lot to both of us. If you'd like to get email reminders about what's going on in the world of Scott and Mike, and science, of course.
And humanism.
Drop me an email to 19mike55@comcast.net, and I will include you in our short reminders about upcoming science topics. You can find our past dialogues cataloged at the Prairie State Humanist YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, and some of them are on the DuPage Unitarian Church, since we've been doing this in the main auditorium as well.
Right. Now, I mean, for you to get it on the Prairie State site, for example, for this one, Justin would have to make a copy of this talk today, give me the
Copy, yeah.
the flash drive of it, and I'd have to give it to you, and you'd have to download it onto there, and we'll see what we can do about that to get them on.
I have some ability. It's becoming more difficult. YouTube's kind of cracking down on it, but I think I still have some ability to just directly download from the DUC site and then upload the video copy to the Humanist site. So on YouTube, you can look for either the DuPage Unitarian Church YouTube, which you're watching now, to find some of our Science Sunday lectures, or you can go to the Prairie State Humanist YouTube page. Also look for the Prairie State Humanists on meetup.com, and that's where we post the schedule of both the science events as well as some of our humanist chapter club events.
And if people want to get to some archived Science Sundays, they'd have to get it through the Prairie State Humanists, I believe. You can't get easily old ones. You can get a more wide selection of older ones.
Oh yeah, from the Prairie State Humanist YouTube. There again, for the past year though, many of them have been up on the DuPage Unitarian Church YouTube, because we've been presenting them live on the on the DuPage Church.
But it seems like I'm not sure if they're archiving them.
Yeah, they're there.
They're there?
Yeah, I
Okay.
can go back and find the talk I gave about, interstellar travel, and some of the ones you gave about the virus, coronavirus and
Like the
whatnot.
bats one and
The
so on
bat
is in
one,
there?
yeah.
Okay, all right, good.
We live on in video immortality.
Not a bad way to go. Catching up a bit, so this past year I found that our daughter in Seattle is going to have a baby girl in October, which is coming up fairly soon. Our son in DC is going to get married in 2022. And then our second eldest daughter, Allison, decided to move to Seattle to be near her sister and her soon-to-be niece, and took up a teaching job there. And our youngest son bought a house in Geneva that he's really proud of. So we found out that I can still bounce back from a tumble on my bike and come through out of that. And Jane's still managing to be as graceful as ever, parenting children who are now more and more out on their own.
Transcontinental.
Yeah, yeah. So what some of this makes me feel, though, I think is a bit of a relic, if you like. And my kids and maybe society as a whole are swimming in the soup of current events, facing issues that sometimes appear like outliers to me. Ways that I normally looked at things and ways that I thought about things are seeming to be odd to others. But when outliers and oddities have been the rule of thumb for a decade or more, maybe you start saying maybe it's not the outliers and the oddities that are so outlying and odd.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more, the guy that's perceiving that. So maybe more likely I'm the outlier and the oddity too, or my way of looking at things can be seen that way too. So many things seem odd and out of the norm to me. Even the new ways that I agree with are causing other people to feel out of place, and so they're seeing this as well too. So I'm talking about things like technology, phones and radios and televisions are not operating like I think they ought to. You try to set the alarm on something and you get all sorts of odd results.
Now this thing is a television, a radio, a flashlight, a phone.
EKG machine.
Yeah, Rolodex, etc.
It's very convenient, but it also doesn't always communicate. Sometimes I just want to turn the TV on and you have trouble doing the things that used to be just something that you always did easily. So technology is one thing that's I'm feeling a little bit out of place in. Cultural issues across the society of marriage and acceptance of others and things have changed quite a bit for many people. As we age, adjusting to health and physical challenges are all different things too. I got the COVID-15 here, I think, or so, and just adjusting to living and looking at the world in a new way. New diseases like we've been facing for the last while, and ways of addressing all the issues that come up from that. It used to be you'd say, you have a disease, you find the cure, you take the cure, you're done. Now it becomes all sorts of different issues of wearing masks and not wearing masks and taking freedoms away from people and everything else. It's an amazing, amazing difference in an oddity and something uncomfortable to me.
Yeah, the dialogues become a bit baffling, especially, I don't want to speak for you, Mike, you can agree or disagree, but the dialogues that we hear culturally about the pandemic and masking and different treatments and whatnot, coming from a more scientific perspective where I deeply respect the discoveries and conclusions drawn by experts. I have very little, if any, expertise of my own, but I have an immense appetite to learn from people that we consider experts, and seeing so many people that are just casually disregarding that expertise, I am so baffled by that.
Yeah. Well, I have a different opinion of that.
Okay. You have your freedom to do that.
I go on to work patterns and relationships. I'm in my 60s and I'm spending time at work. We've got young guys at work. I asked 3 different fellows at work if they could stay late and work on a job that was really hot and needed to be done, and all 3 of them had something more important to do. I was just like walking away shaking my head. It was like, I would never have done that to a boss, when I was in my early 20s.
Did you fire them?
No,
Okay.
I'd probably been hauled up in front of the EOC or something, right? So work patterns and relationships. Sometimes it's even odd. I've been told I'm naive because I consider myself an optimist. You shouldn't be thinking of things in an optimistic manner now. That's not how we look at the world anymore. So that's odd to me, right? Then you get to the part of repeats of lessons that we thought we learned so long ago. And maybe we even knew the first time going in, but lessons about Vietnam and Laos and Iraq and Syria and Libya are now we're learning these lessons again. And people are saying, well, don't try to go into a place like that without a clear goal and everything else. So all the lessons of history and politics and so on that are being repeated, that now we have a little bit of time and history of our own, and we're being asked to learn these lessons all over again. And I said, like you just said also, saying that not believing in experts is somehow scientific. I've been told by people at work when I offered a bonus to people who got a COVID vaccination, completed COVID vaccination, they thought that they were being more scientific than me because they weren't believing in the experts.
They did their own research.
Right. And so, anyways, so you can sense some of my frustration. Maybe as a joke, maybe as a message, but maybe more likely as a legitimate realization of my scientific interests. Some of my kids got me a beautiful hardcover book, Relics. Beautiful picture of a relic creature on the cover, by the nature photographer and essayist Piotr Naskreki.
Oh, that's an eye.
Yeah, that's an eyeball of a I think it's called a fire dragon, but I didn't really research exactly. Okay. But yeah, he's a fabulous photographer and a beautiful essayist and an entomologist, very interested in his specialty is the way the katydids make their sounds that attract their mates. And so he travels all over the world cataloging and describing and picturing, photographing different
Isn't that,
katydids.
I mean, I am blown away by the level of expertise that exists in the human scientific community.
Yeah.
Somebody who just spends his professional life, or her, I don't remember.
Him, Piotr, yeah.
Okay, spends his professional life researching the sounds of katydids.
Right.
I mean, how incredible. Just the opportunities for learning and expression and discovery and wonderment presented by the natural world are just practically, any practical measure, are endless.
Endless, right, right. Yeah, no, that's a great point. As an accomplished example of myself being the species Relictus grandus,
Relictus granthus.
grand relic,
Ah,
I thought I would introduce you to relics and explore what they are, how similar relics are to what I described as qualities in me, and maybe in you or someone you know out there too, and why knowing about relics is important to biology. So, using what I've said so far, can you describe a relic, what you think a relic is?
well, the first thing that comes to mind when thinking about you and relics is obsolete, really. No, but obsolescence.
Dated, aged, yeah.
Yeah, dated, aged, no longer,
Relevant.
like a butter churn.
Irrelevant.
Yeah. When I think of relics, I think of things that have been superseded. The other big context I can think of is some artifact from something that is past, something that is
Right.
no longer, around in the world, whether it's a tool or a civilization or a living being.
Yeah, I don't know if people are coming in on the stream with any answers or thoughts that they have about it, but a relic, yeah, and it can have a variety of different applications. One thing that when I talked to a few people about it, they were talking about, to them, it's like the forefinger of an ancient old saint or something like that. A religious relic is a very important point. And partly, scientists have an answer to my question on the blurb about this talk, scientists have added a T onto it to kind of differentiate some of these things, to say that there's some level of a difference between a relic being a wisp of hair from an ancient saint, or their forefinger, or whatever.
I
like
hadn't
that,
even thought
anything
about that,
else.
but that's right.
Yeah, there's a lot of the part of the original cross, right? How many
Right.
parts of the original cross are in all different churches?
A whole
and
forest worth.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but if you want to talk in terms of a scientific aspect of it, Piotr, he's Polish, and that's the Polish pronunciation and spelling of the word Peter, the name Peter.
Oh,
Piotr Naskreki. So he's defined it as a creature or a habitat that, while acted upon by evolution, remains remarkably similar to its earliest manifestation in the fossil record. So it remains remarkably similar to its earliest manifestation in the fossil record.
some biologists I've seen express a similar idea using the term living fossil. Yeah.
There's some aspects of trying to get away from the word living fossil.
Okay.
Because it implies certain things, and it implies, first of all, that it has to be found in the fossil record, which this does also, and it doesn't necessarily have to, but there has to be some early evidence of its earliest lives.
Okay.
So, and that tends to apply to what I was jokingly starting out talking about. We haven't changed enough, possibly, right? If we don't change to learn all the ways to run our technology properly, if we haven't learned to change how to operate the thermostats in our house as easily as it used to be done or something, all those things are things that make us feel like relics and possibly fit the definition of some of this too.
Do you need help
Remain
with
remarkably similar.
Do you need help with your thermostat? We could talk about that later, maybe.
Okay. It's like, when you do it, it's like, oh yeah, that's obvious, I can do that. And then, 3 months later, you gotta redo it again, and you say, where the heck was I in that?
Yeah. Where's the instruction manual?
Yeah. It's on your computer or something, it's in the cloud. So, does this mean, when you read this, a creature or habitat that, while acted upon by evolution, remains remarkably similar to its earliest manifestations in the fossil record, are we saying that relics don't evolve? We should talk about that concept a bit.
Well, this explicitly says it's acted upon by evolution. So just reading what it says sounds like evolution doesn't leave relics alone in this context.
Yeah, I mean, you'd imagine that a creature that's present today, any creature that's present today, has been acted on by evolution. I think we had this topic a couple of other times where someone was wondering how it's a common fallacy, I think, in evolution. People say that are not evolutionists want to say, well, how come there's still chimps around if man used to be a chimp, right?
Oh, yeah.
The whole evolutionary fallacy in which people don't realize, those people don't realize that chimps have also evolved from the time that they had a common ancestor to humanity. And they've evolved in many ways too.
Well, fish, right? Fish eventually gave rise to human beings, but there are still fish around. So
Right.
the question becomes quite profound.
Right, right. It's deep. Why aren't we fish? Or why are there fish still there? Or what's going on? That's kind of assuming that there's one path of evolution, this beautiful path towards a human, towards Homo sapiens, which has religious overtones to it as well. So you can't say that any creature hasn't evolved. They evolved differently. But this does imply that evolution hasn't made changes that at least are obvious to us from our viewpoint, right?
Right.
So throughout time, these animals have maintained maybe an appearance, behavior, many types of activities, food sources, and so on, that were satisfactory for them when they were their ancient forebears, and they're still satisfactory for them now. So you can't say that relics don't evolve, and I just wanted to make clear that point because I think we faced it a few times in other talks, and it's important to go with. So if we have that kind of basic idea about relics, remember a creature or habitat, and when you say creature, can you mean a plant? Can plants be relics?
Yeah, I think it might be a stretch semantically to call creatures plants, but, you know, there are Venus flytraps and whatnot. But, yeah, sure, plants can maintain some sort of structural or behavioral integrity through geologic and evolutionary time, I would suspect.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're allowing plants to be in this, even though maybe this definition could be crafted a little bit better to specifically say that. But so let's look on. I've got some ideas here. What are relics and what are not? Cyanobacteria. You know, the blue-green algae that we talk about being the first gathering of multicellular organisms banding together, at least, maybe living individually, but banding together, providing the oxygen that started other life on this planet and so on. And cyanobacteria, can you call that a relic? It was around, one of the first creatures that are here, and it's still here now.
Yeah. Yeah, we got the stromatolites in Australia in Shark Bay.
The fossils that are remaining that have fossilized.
Well, these are living colonies. The ones in Shark Bay are living stromatolites that have a similar structure and composition colony as the ones that were extant 1 billion years ago.
So this brings up a point of view in some aspects of, is it a relic, or is it just a creature that keeps on going and surviving? And it's maybe not critical to define that this is a relic or isn't a relic. In my mind, I thought cyanobacteria has evolved and changed into varieties of different types of bacteria. It's spread out so much throughout the world. There's cyanobacteria that's atmospherized, it's blown into the wind, and it's up in the highest reaches of the atmosphere and so on. So it's hard to call it, in my mind, a relic. It seems like it's something that's gone on and spread out around the areas. You can also say that certain aspects, if you get too general, like you say cyanobacteria, it's hard to call it a relic, but there may be a certain type of cyanobacteria that may be a relic and may be so similar to what it was like before, and that hasn't changed, while other cyanobacteria has.
Yeah, specifically the ones that make the stromatolites, big pillow-shaped, sort of rocky colonies of bacteria.
Right.
You know, again, like I said, found for at least 1 billion. I don't have the number in my head, but at least 1 billion years.
Yeah.
And
I think it was more like 3 billion.
Is it? Yeah.
Quite a bit. They were one of the first.
Sounds plausible to me. Yeah.
Well, no, there's bacteria for quite a while. Right?
Yeah, the colony, I don't know. In fact, I know in Australia, strangely enough, even though extant stromatolites are in Australia in Shark Bay, fossil stromatolites are also in Australia that stretch back more than 1 billion years, probably 2 or 3 billion.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Interesting. Ginkgo trees. Would you call them a relic or not a relic?
So I've read books on this topic about living fossils and whatnot, and ginkgo trees are often mentioned.
Yeah, classic example, something that was around at the time of dinosaurs and maintains the same methods of reproduction and growth and so on from
Habitat
that
and-
time.
yeah.
Right. So it's definitely a small enough subset that type of tree is a relic.
Right.
Whereas if you'd say the common topic trees, you wouldn't call trees a relic because they've grown and expanded and diversified in so many ways. So you sometimes have to be more specific in some of these aspects. But we'll see some areas that are pretty general that are relics as well too. In the same aspect, I'd say frogs have continued to diversify and grow and change. They maintain a lot of the qualities that make them frogs and make frogs what they were when amphibians first came about. But frogs would not be considered a relic species. Certain types of frogs may be able to be classified as that as well too. What about dinosaurs? Are they relics?
Well, of course, my mind immediately goes to birds, right?
okay.
So
That's
I'm
the way
probably
you
jumping
can-
ahead.
Yeah, you can dance away from it a little bit.
Yeah.
As dinosaurs, as what we commonly think of dinosaurs, by virtue of the fact that they're not here anymore,
Right.
you can't call them a relic.
Not in this definition.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they have to still be around and still be maintaining that lifestyle and that way of living on the planet.
Well, and it occurs to me also that this is pretty human-centric. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, if you look at the biological and fossil record, one of, if not the most successful multicellular macroscopic organisms that ever flourished on the planet were trilobites. Trilobites were around for something like 250 million years. They don't happen to be around today, but I mean, a trilobite from, I don't know, 150 million years ago could say that it, you know, we could say that it was a relic because its lineage had been around since time immemorial almost.
I would agree with that. Time frame becomes an important factor in some of this too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it brings up interesting questions about evolution and time frame and how long they're here and what changes have occurred, changes that humans can naturally see, you know, and not others. You think of evolution as an obviously very slow process, so the fact that these things are, even if they are evolving, they're evolving at a evolutionary pace, which means that many changes aren't too obvious, but you can see that things that have maintained much of their structure and behavior and so on are what we're calling as relics. It's a scientific term that has a little bit of wriggle room in it, I think, right? I don't think it helps, well, I think it's a descriptive term for scientists, and I don't think it's an analytical term, right?
Yeah, well, like a lot of terminology in science, there are things that clearly fall into the category, things that clearly don't fall into the category, and then there's a big gray area in the middle, and that's where a lot of scientists end up having, you know, arguments about semantics and definitions.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. So the coelacanth, I don't know if people out there, I think that many of you are probably familiar with the coelacanth.
I call it coelacanth. Is that?
Is it?
I thought. I don't know.
Coelacanth?
Yeah.
All right. We'll use either ones. Here's a picture of it.
Yeah. Whatever we call it, there it is.
Yeah. I can spell it, I just can't pronounce it, I guess. So this is a live animal, often called for many dozens of years a living fossil. They had no evidence of this as a living creature at all until one was pulled up by a fisherman in the 1930s, happened to bring it back to shore, and somebody mentioned to a woman who was had an interest in science that this was an interesting fish, an uncommon fish that this guy had brought to the market. And they kept it for a few days before she was able to get there. It was rotting and in pretty bad shape, but she still saw it as a pretty amazing creature, and it matched up with the fossil structure of things that had been determined, had thought to have died off over 100 million years ago. So the coelacanth is something now. It's been found numerous times since. It's been photographed, obviously. This is a living one. You can get photographs of them you know, on display after they've been brought up and captured and so on. So it's a rare fish, but it's fairly common. And it shows, it was obviously identified very quickly as a coelacanth and was not, had no big changes from what people saw from such a long time ago. So a coelacanth along with the ginkgo trees would be good demonstrations of relics. Flowering plants? Probably not. They've evolved and changed. You can see the structures change and the flowers change and so on. So it's not really a relic.
And they're what? The whole angiosperm line is something like 70 million years old or so. It's relatively new. The whole branch of flowering plants.
So this last one is an interesting one because it fits in with the definition a little bit. what's called the succulent Kuru region of South Africa. There are many endemic meaning native to that area and not found elsewhere, many endemic plants and animals in that area, mainly insects, and this book has quite a lot of pictures of amazing insects in here. But there's more than 10,000 succulent varieties, things like aloe. Succulents are plants that store their liquid, store water inside them, like cacti and so on. We're familiar with them, the desert type of plant. And so I've got a picture of the region to help you see it a little bit here. That's the tip of South Africa there. The Atlantic Ocean is off to the side there. And along in this red area, this is the succulent Kuru region. This is a biological region that is the size of Illinois, maybe, something like that, and has more endemic varieties of plants to it than is found in all of North America, Europe, and northern Russia.
Wow. In that one region?
In that one region.
There's a greater variety of species, is what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So I think they define something like 7 biomes, 7 basic areas of life in the planet, and this is one of the 7.
And this area is just full of all kinds of species of succulents then, right?
Right, you can kind of see trees are very, very uncommon there. Trees just take too much energy and water and moisture to work. And the trees that grow there, that's called a quiver tree that you can see in the picture. And there's a few further off in the background. But the quiver tree is a plant that grows and has completely different types of respiration. It can close off all its spores, not pores, all its capacity for letting in energy and for letting out water.
Yeah.
And so it can completely close them during the heat of the day and act almost like a succulent or like a rock maybe or something. It doesn't give out water.
Doesn't sweat.
Yeah, but then it opens up, the quiver tree opens up in the evening in the cooler weather, and then it does its respiration. They grow very slow. It can take them 100 years to get to the height that you see in there, to its normal adult height, because it grows so slowly. It's got a much slower respiration cycle to it.
Huh.
So, but most of the plants are the low scrubs there and so on that you can see. This is like flowering season in the front part here, and very uncommon plants that hold on to their water. I think I'll show you some pictures of at least one of them later, like now. So this is, on the right, is called Pearson's aloe. Its whole body is a living cistern of water storage. Those are the leaves of the aloe plant, and you can see them bulging with all the water it can possibly collect.
You saw on the right, so that's the green one you're talking about?
I'm sorry, the red one,
Okay.
the Pearson's aloe on the right.
Okay.
I'm saying,
The red or green?
it's, what,
Well, the red, I mean, it's obviously there's a big red plant and then a kind of a greenish plant.
well, there's a big red plant, right,
Yeah.
and it's on the left side, excuse me. And that's the Pearson's aloe. You can see the
Okay.
typical aloe leaves and the reddish color to it. And that is storing up massive amounts of water. On the right, if you look at it carefully, it takes a while to see it. That's called a kuru rockhopper, and it's an insect.
Oh, aha.
Once I say it, maybe now you see it. That is a pretty amazing thing. That's a female kuru rockhopper, and I don't know how you tell the difference. Maybe you just ask them, but
Yeah, at a cocktail party.
yeah. It's the, or maybe you shouldn't. It's the size of a mouse, and it protects herself from desiccation, from drying out, by sporting a rock-hard, water-impenetrable cuticle skin.
Wow.
It's similar to your fingernails in hardness. She can shut tight all the spiracles, just like the quiver tree can, that are her breathing apparatus. Do you know that insects don't breathe using their mouth? They're not mouth breathers at all. They don't do that. They breathe by open spiracles, they call them, or pores, that are in all the 3 different parts, the head, the abdomen, and the thorax, of the animal, and that is how oxygen gets in and out to the processes and then interacts with the blood and travels through the system. So again, to stop drying out, to stop desiccation, the rockhopper closes those off, and that's her breathing apparatus, remember, right? Closes off her breathing apparatus during the heat of the day, and they rest buried in sand during that heat of the daytime. Then they come out at night too and go doing their business after that too. So because there's so many, these rockhoppers don't live anywhere except in this succulent kuru, and these brands of aloe don't live anywhere else except in this succulent kuru. They've maintained their structure. There's not a lot of reason to change. You don't want to change many behaviors. Evolutionary pressures don't really act too much on these creatures.
As long as the habitat doesn't change much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so relics are somewhat of a bellwether for how steady a habitat is. They can live in a habitat that doesn't change, and so they're a great bellwether for when things are changing. The succulent kuru has been around. It's protected now. Much of it's protected land, and you can't build houses there and do different things on that in much of the area of it, so that this habitat can stay. And actually, if you would look at this whole habitat, I'll go back to that picture, this habitat of the succulent kuru in this area, by many scientists, is considered a relic too. This is an area that has maintained its environment, it has maintained its ecosystem for many, many years and hasn't changed very much at all. So it's a habitat that, while it's acted upon by evolution, it remains remarkably similar to its earliest manifestation. Okay? So those are some interesting dives into different things. Plants, animals, and even habitats and whole ecosystems can be relics, we've seen.
I was thinking about the giant redwood biome of California. That's a very particular ecological niche that's quite fragile. But the giant redwoods only thrive in that niche, and nowhere else in the world. And so, as long as there have been giant redwoods, perhaps even dating back to a much greater extent in the fossil record, that might tell us something about the climate in that place at that time, because we can identify particular species with particular habitats.
I would say that if you find relics, it's a sign of stability, right?
Yeah.
If you see no relics in an area, it's a sign that there's been a lot of change.
They had to evolve into something more compatible with the newly changed area.
Right, right. So, let me introduce you to a few more here. This is a tuatara, which is the Maori term for peaks or peaks on its back. And you can see the little spikes on the back of this creature. Very interesting creature. And I can read that to you. You can probably read 250 million years ago, and it flourished in the Mesozoic time. The Turtara is considered the most unspecialized living amniote tetrapod. Okay, so unspecialized means no definite adaptations, right, developed by evolutionary pressure.
To a particular habitat, perhaps?
Right. And a tetrapod is a walking creature, right?
Oh, I thought it was a geometric shape. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, tetrapod is four-limbed.
Right.
Yeah.
And an amniote. What does amniote mean?
Amniotic fluid.
Right.
So it has something to do with the way it gives birth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It gives birth, it has, the other potential ways are what way most reptiles do, and that's egg laying.
Yeah.
Amnio makes an amniotic fluid and a womb and so on, so it generally a live birth, right?
So these creatures have live births?
Right.
Wow.
So it's very different than most others, reptiles and so on.
Not a lizard then. I mean, you may look at it and naively say that's a lizard,
Right.
but it's its own critter.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, because it's on its own, as they have done DNA testing on these things, they see where they
Okay.
specialize and where they break off, and they're so specialized that this Turtara is the only one in its
Branch.
genus,
Yeah,
in its branch of the tree.
That makes sense.
So then you have to start deciding what makes it this or that. The common ways of defining things like mammals don't always work with platypi or something.
So this may be closer, I'm just speculating out loud wildly. I may have even read this in a book and forgotten about it, but it sounds plausible that this is closer to the common ancestor between tetrapod reptiles and dinosaurs and whatnot. Between early tetrapods and the line that led to mammals, this might be closer to that branching point then.
It's somewhat, it's got like amphibian tendencies to it, less than reptile tendencies to it.
But live young.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
We could spend a lifetime exploring this animal.
right, and people have and do.
Yeah.
So the Tuatara, it's an amazing animal from New Zealand and Australia. It demonstrates to me also the historical inaccuracy of the biblical story of Noah and the Great Flood.
What?
Right?
What are
Yeah,
you talking about?
I'm not kidding. This is science here. If you list the mammals that populated Australia and New Zealand when white settlers first came to the area, you would really find no placental mammals. There are two exceptions to that, maybe a couple more. The Maoris, actually, when they came over, brought dogs and cats.
Okay.
Also rats. I don't think they meant to bring the rats, but rats came along on their boats. And the other mammal that's there in New Zealand, and it was really the only one not brought by the Maori or whites later, is another animal. And when I say it, I think you'd be pretty able to say why. That's animal we talked about in a prior Science Sunday, bats. Bats are able to fly over the distances and populate these islands too. So bats were really the only native animal that...
Are they placental?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So all living native mammals, really, except the bats, which are still somewhat introduced, but they introduced themselves, are marsupials, right? Having a pouch outside the mother for the growth and development of the baby. The baby's usually born after only a month or a few weeks of conception, and then it crawls into this pouch and nurses and nurtures and grows inside the pouch.
Like an external womb.
Right, right. So marsupials, we're used to them in the U.S., and in North America is really the only other place that has marsupials are opossums, right? But in Australia and New Zealand, there were marsupial tigers, marsupial wolves, marsupial mice, all different types of things.
Yeah, they radiated to fill all kinds of ecological niches that would be filled by tigers and wolves and mice and
Yeah.
herbivores and carnivores and so on.
All the open niches that were there were filled by the outgrowth, the development from some common ancestor to fill these niches
So they were in their own compartment on Noah's Ark then, their own special place.
Well, if that's the way you want to do it, then if they were in their own compartment, then when the ark landed on Mount Ararat, right?
Yeah.
And they got out, they all had to take a direct travel all the way to Australia, and they couldn't die and leave any fossil record or anything, all the way from
Yeah.
the Mideast all the way to New Zealand and Australia.
Well, it's a miracle, Mike.
Well, I don't know. So why is there a complete different set of animals in Australia and New Zealand than found anywhere else? If Noah's story was accurate, we would see fossil evidence of something, or some
Yeah.
level of evidence of something, that animals, marsupial animals, would be scattered all the way there.
Well, there was a really persuasive piece of sort of cultural knowledge that I can understand would give rise to hypotheses about the entire world being covered with water, and that's the fact that you can find fossil seashells, relic seashells, perhaps many related to extant species, on tops of mountains.
Yeah.
So, you know, an early hypothesis, how does a seashell get on top of a mountain? Well, the mountain must have been underwater. So, you know, it's not that people were stupid when
No.
they came up with ideas like
No.
this. They didn't have enough evidence about mountains
You come
coming
up
and
with a
going.
story, and they
Right.
didn't have a world view either, right? They lived in their own little area.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful story about Leonardo da Vinci being asked about this, and
Right.
on the mountainsides around Florence, where he lived, they were finding shells all over, and people wanted to know why, and he started studying that and wrote a lot of interesting things about that too. And he had some theories, some of which were pretty accurate, and some of which probably needed some further discussion, but
Yeah, oh my goodness, what a wonderful man. He's one of my heroes throughout history.
Yeah.
I think he lived about 200 years too early for his mind to be as, you know, incredibly imaginative and capable and prolific. If he'd have been 200 years later, then he'd have given Newton a run for his money, that's for sure.
yeah, yeah. So the tuatara has a skeleton and structure that's more primitive than all current reptiles, and it points to its relatedness to ancient, now extinct reptiles, including dinosaurs. It's the only, and I believe it is considered to be in the reptile family, but a separate break away from it. It's the only one. Its skull has 2 openings in it, which most other reptiles, originally the fossil record shows 2 openings in alligators and crocodiles, all creatures except turtles, which never had 2 openings, but
What do you mean openings? Like at
Like
the base of this
base of the skull, yeah.
Okay.
And this one maintains those 2 openings in it, and the rest had them for a while and then got rid of them.
Huh.
So it has an ability to be active in cold weather, which is probably why it survived, as climate changes doomed others similar to it. But influxes of the rats and dogs and pigs brought by the ancestors of the Maoris doomed these slow, tasty reptiles and their eggs. So they did have eggs. They were
Eggs.
amniotic, but they had eggs.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Plus many more now extinct native bird species.
Well, I'm going to have to look into this Turtara thing.
Yeah.
I've never encountered it before that I can recall.
Europeans followed later with more of the above animals, the dogs and cats and hedgehogs they brought in too, deer, fox, mice. Europeans basically came to New Zealand and wanted to make it like their own homeland.
Brought rabbits and, yeah,
Right.
right, yeah.
And a lot of other furry species, but these animals were just terror on tuataras. They
Yeah.
just tuataras could not withstand this pressure of all these other creatures that found them tasty.
Yeah.
Only place that tuataras survived were on some small islands offshore that nobody ever went to.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, recognizing its uniqueness and value to science, the New Zealand government at last declared tuataras strictly protected. And now they've tried to bring them back, but you bring them back on a place that has so many other creatures on it, they can't survive. They've actually built near Wellington a section of land. They fenced it in with a fence that's supposed to be proof, mice-proof, rabbit-proof,
Yeah.
everything else. And actually, even small baby mice are supposed to not be able to get through it, and they've started to redevelop tuataras on that area. they've seen mice have somehow gotten in anyways.
Yeah.
But so far, the tuataras are living on the, what's called the mainland, the large island, the North Island of New Zealand. So we're moving along, but tuatara is an interesting
Yeah.
critter.
Might have to have a whole Science Sunday on Turtara when
Wow.
we find out more about it.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. Oh, I know this one.
I've talked about these folks before. The male pronghorn antelope and the female pronghorn antelope. I put on two nice pictures here. They are kind of defined and described as sausages on very thin legs. They only weigh about 100 pounds, and they have very strong legs, very interesting structures of their bones and so on, but they're very barreled like that. And if we look back at the male, it shows up on both of them, but very, very barreled structure.
Very straight backbone.
Yeah.
Interesting,
It's one of my favorite animals. I talked about it at a prior Science Sunday about 6 years ago. It's a beauty, I think. Pronghorns have lived throughout much of North America for 20 to 30 million years. There's fossil evidence of them in Florida, Minnesota, all throughout the West, and so throughout much of North America. And they specialize in speed. They are the fastest land animals on our continent. They can run at 30 miles per hour almost indefinitely, 30 miles an hour. They can run 45 miles per hour for many, many miles, and even their top speed of an incredible 60 miles per hour can be sustained for surprisingly long distances. They have an amazingly long stride of almost 30 feet,
Wow.
which is about identical to the Olympic long jump record, the world record.
Yeah,
in
for a
long jump.
100-pound animal to have a 30-foot,
Yeah.
not stride, whatever you call it,
Yeah.
pace.
Stride is a word.
Yeah.
But they do it stride after stride.
Yeah. Wow.
And in about a third of a second each. Not only can a pronghorn run the length of a football field in about 3 seconds, but if you angle that field up a mountainside, add gopher holes and sagebrush and rocks, throw in a few ground squirrel holes, and turn the temperature up to about 110 degrees, it would still take the pronghorn about 3 seconds to navigate this,
Wow.
and less than a dozen steps to do it. Count with me. 1 Mississippi. In that time, our pronghorn friend has taken 3 to 4 30-foot strides
Wow.
and traveled over 100 feet. When Meriwether Lewis first described pronghorns on the western plains, he wrote that their running appeared rather the rapid flight of birds rather than the motion of quadrupeds. It's just amazing. No predator on the North American continent can come close to their speed. Coyotes and wolves are in the 35 to 40 mile per hour range and only for short distances. So why did pronghorns evolve this blazing speed? Think of the evolutionary effort expelled to evolve to this level of perfection.
You told me the answer once.
Yes. Why did the pronghorn do it? And the answer is a ghost.
Yeah.
And a ghost it's not a relic, but it's a ghost. And the ghost is the American cheetah. The American cheetah lived up until, I think I have a picture through here a little bit. I want to get to that in a little bit. I'll show you a picture of the American cheetah in a little bit, but very similar to the African cheetah and very powerful,
But gone.
but gone. Lived about not 20 to 30 million years ago when the pronghorn antelope developed here, but specialized and moved away from cougars and so on, branched out at about 3 million years ago. So it started developing, chasing pronghorns. Had to have somebody that could catch the pronghorns, and the pronghorns developed their speed, increased their speed, and the cheetahs improved their speed, and they
An
both
arms race, biological arms race.
biological arms race.
Yep.
So, there's a lot to say about what the pronghorn does and why I consider it a relic, and I'll go through some pretty quickly here. And there were originally 12 different genera of, 12 different species of pronghorns. 11 of them have died out, aren't around anymore. So many of them didn't make it. Evolution is obviously a failure, has a failure aspect to it too, because the animals that aren't evolved properly, aren't evolved to achieve success, die off. So the other genera all died off, and that about 10 to 12,000 years ago, great death of animals, of the large animals on this continent. Something like 75% of the animals over 100 pounds died off in this time, and there's 3 different reasons for it. Maybe we'll have a Science Sunday talking about that as well too.
Yeah.
Next, they have a very tawny and mottled coat, and so they have a camouflage and coloring to them that helps them blend in very well. They're almost impossible to see if you look at them head on, because they blend in with the grays and the distance. And
Yeah, I've never seen one.
Yeah. There might be one right here and we don't even notice it. Protection from weather. They have a coat on them that their hairs can puff up. They're about 3 inches long, and they can puff up to almost half an inch thick. They're almost like sponges. So they can puff up and evaporate a lot of water and so on, or in cold weather they can flatten down tight and make almost like a complete coverage of their body.
Although fluffy seems to be good for cold too. More dead airspace
Yeah.
between the hairs.
Yeah, I think that it's, yeah, I agree with that. I think that it's for like rain and stormy and things like that. It protects from getting in. Their vision, they have eyes almost the size, comparable to the size of elephants.
Wow.
And you can see very high up, eye sockets very high up. Their vision is incredible. They can see things very far away so that they can be wary and ready to move when they need to move. Also imagine if you're browsing down on the ground and eating things off the ground, and a high set eye set will let you see things that are coming at you pretty sooner.
Reminds me of the Gungan from Star Wars. They must have had a similar evolutionary path.
Yeah, yeah. Reproduction and balance. The female of the pronghorns has a split uterus, has 2 chambers to the uterus. And so almost always, except for their first birth, almost always they have twins.
Huh.
And when they have twins, they have about 8 pounds of pronghorn on one side and 8 pounds of pronghorn on the other side, babies, and they balance out, and they can run like the wind. There's no real markable slowdown in their running, even when they're fully pregnant. Other things, the gestation period is 252 days.
Wow.
Some other animals similar to them have gestations in the 180 days or something. So these babies come out and they can stand up within 5 minutes. They can run within 30 minutes. I think that they can, if I can see this right, they can stand within 30 minutes after being born, and at 7 days can outrun you or me.
Wow. Well, nearly anything could outrun me.
The speed. They've evolved, speed is involved in all hoofed animals, but pronghorns are literally in a class of their own. Over the last 20 to 30 million years, these pronghorns have evolved speed in response to a similar increase in the speed of their predators. And like I said, they can get up to 60 miles an hour. A 5-week-old fawn of a pronghorn antelope can outrun any Kentucky Derby winner.
Wow.
Oxygen utilization is another fantastic part of the story. They're just designed to shotgun, it's probably the only way you can say it, oxygen. The whole method of doing it, you and I have about a 3/4 of an inch diameter windpipe, about the size of your thumb. They have a 2-inch diameter windpipe, so they can ingest a lot. As soon as they start running, their tongue lolls out of their mouth. And just try this sometime with your only 3/4 of an inch diameter windpipe. Put your head out a car window, driving 60 miles an hour. Put your tongue to the side and see how much oxygen goes down your throat. So they have amazing amounts. Their whole system is fueled by oxygen, and they have 1/3 more blood cells than other mammals their size to carry oxygen around. Half again as much blood, and 2/3 more hemoglobin, and the special esophagus that's 2 inches in diameter. They can get oxygen to their system at incredible rates. So, anyways, this is a picture of the American cheetah. I'm running low on time. We'll probably take another 5 minutes or so to try to tie this all up. But from 3 million years ago and died out only about 12,000 years ago. So we'll talk more about North American megafauna sometime. And what makes them a relic? One thing is that there is nothing predating on them as adults. The fawns are actually picked off quite readily by wolves and coyotes when they're young, but after that they still maintain this. Why haven't they slowed down to 45 miles an hour or something like that if nothing else can do it? That's enough.
Hasn't been long enough.
12,000 years is evolutionarily nothing, right?
For a large animal like that, yeah.
There's a story about a man had a rescue firm on land in Nevada, and there were pronghorns near him, and he ended up getting a couple of cheetahs that from a small circus or something that didn't have them, or a zoo that couldn't keep them anymore, and he decided that he was going to keep them healthy. It's hard to keep cheetahs healthy in captivity. And so he put toys on the back of his truck, and he was driving across the Nevada desert at 60 miles an hour, giving his cheetahs exercise. And once he looked up and he saw on a hillside a bunch of pronghorns just looking like, there they are.
I haven't seen one of those in a while.
Other relics, horseshoe crabs for millions and millions of years. 250 million years ago, there's evidence of them looking just like this, having the same type of activity. These are mating on a beach in Delaware and I think Long Island, New Jersey, around that. And there's evidence that they've been around like for 480 million years, just since the Cambrian explosion.
Yeah,
right?
Close relatives of the aforementioned trilobites.
Right, right. And just their life and their activities and their habitat. So these creatures maintain their habits and their ways of life over hundreds of millions of years. Here's a picture of a fossil of a ginkgo tree that looks like it could have been fallen and pressed into some mud yesterday. This one is dated at 50 million years old, but actually there's evidence from 275 million years in the fossil record of ginkgo trees.
We have one outside the
Outside the church
right?
here, yeah. Mm-hmm. This is an incredible, this is down in South Africa as well too, and I'm not sure if it's in the succulent kuru area or not, but it's the Encephalatos latifrons. And this is, it looks like a generic picture of a frondy kind of tree to you here. You can see a central white kind of mound in the middle. These are cycads. Some botanists speculate that this plant evolved painfully sharp spines as a protection against grazing dinosaurs. So if you look, this is, they're very woody. This is a close-up that I was able to get of the picture that it had, and you wouldn't really go grazing on that very readily.
Nope.
It's not a very pleasant.
I'm not a dinosaur, and I still wouldn't bite that.
Right. It's probably had some benefit to other animals that would do it too, but yeah, just amazing. So those painfully sharp spines on it protect that plant. And they think there's evidence of it being around since dinosaur times. So you could consider that a relic in that way as well, too. All right. So why do species become relics, and what can we learn from this occurrence? Some species become relics because of the disappearance of their habitat, confining their survival to rare ecological refuges. Most other relic species ended up due to some evolutionary process. For example, being outcompeted by a lineage of more successful relatives or similar species. There's an interesting dichotomy here. We can't say that relic species are replicas or representatives of living things from long, long ago. We talked about why they aren't the same or replicas. They are, after all, organisms evolved to live in modern conditions. But we can say their structure and behaviors can give us clues to what life was like during the times when they were widespread. Horseshoe crab spawning behavior reminds us of what great dangers abounded in the seas of 200, 300 million years ago, which drove these creatures out of the water and onto hostile, but still safer, dry land. So we can get a fuller picture of the times. Pronghorn herds alive today greatly expand our vista as we try to discern what the American savanna of 1 million years ago appeared to the saber-toothed tigers, hyenas, and giant short-faced bear that counted on them as a food source at that time. And those lovely little tuataras, maybe Scott's new favorite critter. The ancient Maori, as well as the European settlers of New Zealand and the rest of the South Pacific, tried assiduously to make their new home resemble the land they left. In doing so, they interrupted the ecosystems that made possible the creatures and plants endemic to New Zealand, sadly. Now, much of New Zealand looks like a European farmstead. By understanding the creatures that were the original homesteaders of the area, we can better understand how to take care of the many varied places under our responsibility and treat them with better kindness and understanding. Relics are the world's priceless inheritance, in a sense. They often carry genes that otherwise would disappear from the world's genetic pool. We have a lot to learn about long-term survival from these ancient forebears, and it seems to be high time for us to take a more careful study of the topic. Okay, thank you very much for coming to Science Sunday. Do we have any questions or thoughts, Scott?
No, we've had quite a few people sort of popping in and out, but no questions. One thing, you talked about the value of some of these relic species. I want to add that the blood of horseshoe crabs is being studied for its potentially really beneficial medicinal properties as antibacterial, et cetera. So
it's not even being studied, it's being used. It's a definite thing that they use it. And I just was reading about that, and I can't remember the purpose for it, but they're capturing tens or hundreds of thousands of horseshoe crabs every year and bleeding them, returning them back, supposedly, whether they are or not. But yeah, it's a very, very important thing. There's supposedly a commercial replica of that or substitute for it, but it hasn't gotten full approval yet, so...
There's this news story I just found about horseshoe crab blood is helpful for making the COVID-19 vaccine. So I haven't read the story, but that's just very quickly an example of how some of these ancient species, we talk about them being ancient and they're not useful anymore. They've been surpassed by modern creatures and whatnot, but they can still hold a lot of information about the way nature works, as well as showing us how to make progress combating some modern problems.
When you think of the world's gene pool, these outliers, these oddities, these relics, these Mike Winners, are very important. No, they have an outsized amount of differences to them in their genetic structure, in their blood supply, in their ways of living, the way that made them survive, so that there's a lot to learn about survival and success from these creatures that have been able to do that so much.
Okay, where'd the T come from? Why relic?
The T came in because I think that scientists wanted to differentiate the topic from relics that have a religious nature to them.
Or anthropological or whatever. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it was fun.
Thanks for watching.
Hope everyone has a great Sunday, a great Labor Day, happy holiday here to people, and Scott will be in a couple weeks with Science Sunday, on third Sunday of September.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about UFOs and little green men, and it's all the rage these days, so I'm hopping on the bandwagon.
All right.
All right.
All right. Thanks a lot.